Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Noel, and I'm the pastor of the First Baptist Church in LaGrange. And to the Slusher family, sorry that I could not be with you in person, but I was certainly very honored and humbled that you would ask me to share some thoughts about Glen with you. And I'm going to share those thoughts with you, but I'm not going to share them necessarily as a pastor, but as a friend. Glen was my friend, but he was so much more. I attended Larry Christian Academy back in the day, and Janie was in my class, and we formed a wonderful friendship that I have cherished over the years. And Janie, I know you're watching this, and I just want you to know that I love you. And if I were there, I'd give you a great big hug. But thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts about your dad with you this morning. I remember meeting Mr. Slusher, and for many years that's how I addressed him, as Mr. Slusher. And the first time that I met him, I remembered thinking, what a giant of a man. He was huge. I remember the first time that he shook my hand. I couldn't help but notice the size and the strength of his hands. If you're going to shake hands with Glen Slusher, you better shake hands like a man. He didn't like those sissy handshakes. And so I always remembered that when I shook his hand. Glen was a man's man in stature, in strength, and it didn't take me very long to know and understand that he was a man's man in spiritual stature as well. All of that to the point of intimidation. I think of Paul's charge at the end of 1 Corinthians in chapter 16, verses 13 and 14, when he said this, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love." Glen was all of those things. He acted like a man, God's man. I've had many strong men in my life who've had a profound influence, and Glen was one of those. Glen knew how to have fun, and probably next to spending time with his family, golf was his passion. I played golf several times with Glen, but can I be honest with you? Those weren't the most enjoyable rounds I ever had. Glen was very good at golf, as many of you probably know. And he took great pleasure in beating me and letting me know that I wasn't very good at golf. I remember playing with Glen at Forest Hills Golf Course, and the very first hole, I had a 30-foot putt. And I was thinking to myself, man, I could impress Glen if I could make this 30-foot putt. And the Lord was with me that day, and I made that putt. And I remember Glen's reaction. He just looked at me and said, "We'll see." I knew what that meant. It was like that was lucky, and that's not going to last for the whole round. If ever I needed a lesson in humility, all I had to do was play a round of golf with Glen. Glen wasn't just passionate about golf, he was passionate about God and the gospel. Didn't take very long if you spent any time with Glen at all. He shared Christ with everyone, everywhere he went. If there was one person that I've met in my life that I felt had the gift of evangelism, it was Glen Slusher. And I knew that every time that I would spend time with Glen, the very first question he would ask me was this: who was the last person you shared Christ with? Have you led anyone to the Lord? He always shared with me those people that he had the opportunity of sharing Christ with. And a lot of the times, where he shared Christ with people was on the golf course. And he would show up at the course, and if there was somebody playing by themselves, he would play alongside of them. And I kind of picture it this way. Glen would ask them to play a round of golf, and after he thoroughly beat them, he would say, "So are you ready to receive Christ?" And so I believe that he was very intimidating in that way, but God used that even on the golf course, and he had many opportunities to lead people to the Lord. Ray Anowski, Ray is probably here at this memorial service this morning, is one of those men that Glen had a hand in leading to Christ. And I remember Glen brought Ray to me. He introduced me to Ray, and he introduced Ray to our church. Ray became a member and is a member of our church, and he's serving the Lord right here at our church. I know I've painted a picture of a rough, tough, rugged, intimidating man, but Glen did have a gracious side. The second verse of the two I read said that after acting like men and being strong, it says, "Let all you do be done in love." I always knew Glen loved me. He was always such an encouragement to me. I remember when I became the pastor of First Baptist and the installation service that the church had for me, Glen attended. And after the service, he came up and gave me a big bear hug like he typically would do. And he gave me two pieces of advice. He said, "Love your people and preach the word." And I've remembered that for my whole pastorate. And those two things are things that I strive to do. 2 years later, our church called an ordination council for me. And Glen came and he served on the ordination council. And I remember that, and I have my ordination certificate hanging in my office, and Glen Slusher's signature is on my ordination certificate. He was such an encouragement to me that way. But I think his gracious side, for me, came out most when my dad died. And for those of you that don't know how that happened, Mom and Dad were on their 45th anniversary. They were on a cruise to Hawaii, and Dad passed away somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. A very devastating time for my mom. And I remember that sometime after the memorial service, Glen just showed up at the house, and he took my mom, and they took a walk around the pond, and he just spent some time comforting my mom. And she remembers that to this day. I loved Glen Slusher. He had a profound influence on my life, and I'm going to miss him. And if Glen were here, and I have his picture behind me, if he were here at his own memorial service, and if he were given the opportunity to tell me one thing, and maybe if he had the opportunity to say something to you, his family and friends, I think it might be what David had to say to his son Solomon in 1 Kings 2, 1 through 3. And I want to close my thoughts with you this morning by reading that passage. It says this: "Now the days of David grew near that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man." I can hear Glen saying that. "And keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn." Thanks for the honor and privilege of allowing me to share some of these thoughts with you this morning. I want to be God's man. And Glen had a profound impact in showing me what that means. To be a man's man, to be God's man in this world. And I hope and pray, just as I said at my dad's funeral, if I could be half the man that my dad was, if I could be half the man that Glen was, then I think I will hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So thank you for letting me share these thoughts with you this morning.